Greetings and welcome to the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Kappa Omega Chapter, Spotlight on Excellence as we continue to soar. Our 2022 Chapter Awards and Community Recognition Program.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second annual virtual Chapter Awards and Community Recognition Program, where our theme is Spotlight on Excellence as we continue to soar. I, Dr. Nina Reyes-Williams, and Ms. Morgan Easley will serve as your MCs. At this time, I invite the Vice President of the Kappa Omega Chapter, Ms. Bridgette Grant. Not only does she serve as the Vice President, but as the Chapter Program Chairman as well. She has done a phenomenal job in helping to facilitate our international and chapter programs.
Welcome, members of Kappa Omega, of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and all of our distinguished community partners. Kappa Omega has served in the Southwest Atlanta area with a sincere heart and a promise to provide service to all mankind. We would like to thank you and welcome you to this evening's program.
Next on our program, we will have the meditation and invocation prepared by Ms. BJohnson, followed by the occasion read by Ms. Veronica Anthony Norris.
My Soar sisters of Kappa Omega Chapter, as we breathe deeply and allow the magic of the night to be filled with hearts and our minds, you hear a voice lovingly carrying your name. It tells you are loved, you are lovable, and sisterly loved too. You smile as the expansion feeling of unconditional love and acceptance fill each and every cell of your body. Breathe deeply and allow the magic to follow. My Kappa Omega sister sorors of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Let's keep the spotlight on excellence as we continue to soar and grow. May your Christmas be merry and bright, and your holiday be filled with peace, love, and great cheer. Breathe deeply and allow the magic to flow. My Kappa Omega sorors of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority. Let's keep the spotlight on excellence as we continue to soar and grow. Happy holidays. Cheers to everyone.
The Kappa Omega Chapters Spotlight on Excellence as we continue to soar awards presentation will highlight our chapters excellence in leadership, membership, our targets, initiatives, and also spotlight our community partners. These combined efforts have projected impactful and sustainable service to the communities we serve. The 2022 service projects transitioned from our international targets to Alpha Kappa Alpha's new international initiative. Kappa Omega has continued its legacy as the premier chapter throughout our 99th year since our chartering in 1923. We are delighted to bring to you our spotlight on excellence tonight.
Good evening, everyone. We would first like to take an opportunity to introduce our chapter president, Dr. LeKeisha D. Jackson. She is the 42nd president of the Kappa Omega chapter, and her term was 2019 through 2022. We want to take this opportunity to thank her for her excellent service, leadership, and guidance as we get ready to celebrate our chapter centennial. She has ensured that we are truly their premier chapter. Next, we would like to introduce our Kappa Omega Vice President, Ms. Bridgette Grant. Ms. Bridgette Grant, along with serving as the Vice President, also chairs the program committee and ensures that we implement the international programs as outlined by our leadership. Ms. Danette Anthony Reed is the current international president and CEO of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Ms. Danette Anthony Reed has instituted the Soaring to Greater Heights of Service and Sisterhood Leadership, and we look forward to continuing to soar under her guidance. As Ms. Norris stated, we are in transition from one administration to the next, so we also want to give honor to Dr. Glenda Cover, the 30th International President and CEO of the sorority, and thank her for her excellent leadership. And welcome Ms. Danette Anthony Reed, the 31st International President and CEO. For the South Atlantic region, we also want to thank Mrs. Carolyn G. Randolph for her service as our outgoing regional director and welcome in the Tune administration of Mrs. Tiffany Moore Russell, the new South Atlantic regional director. Serving as Cluster 5 leadership, we want to thank Ms. Melanie Key Bales for her leadership for Cluster 5 and welcome in Ms. Angela Campbell, the new Cluster 5 coordinator. And now I'll turn it back over to our MCs for tonight.
We would like to take time and honor Kappa Omega's President's Council. This is a council that is comprised of all of the former basilisks or presidents of the Kappa Omega chapter. Dr. Ann Watts serves as the chairman. Others on the council include Mrs. Alfredine Scott Benton, Dr. Icy L. Johnson, Dr. LeKeisha Payton Stewart, Miss Deborah L. Sims, Miss Franca H. Young, and Miss Marjorie Young. On the next couple slides, we would like to honor those 2022 Kappa Omega officers for their exemplary chapter leadership. Dr. LeKeisha Jackson, President. Ms. Bridgette Grant, Vice President and Program Chairman. Mrs. Theresa Wilkins, Recording Secretary. Mrs. Colette Bowles, Assistant Recording Secretary. Ms. Dermony Walker, Treasurer. Mrs. Natalie Bryant, Financial Secretary. Ms. Harriet Fairley, Corresponding Secretary. Mrs. Sabrina Robinson, Ivy Leaf Reporter. Ms. Kismet Sims, Hostess. Mrs. Jolene Butts Freeman, the Graduate Advisor for the Alpha Pi Chapter at Clark Atlanta University. Mrs. Brenda Duncan, Sergeant of Arms. Dr. Linda Thompson, Parliamentarian. Ms. Katrina Wilson, Business Manager. Mrs. Keisha Bonds, Business Manager. And Reverend Dr. Tanya Miles, Chaplain. Ms. Dolores Cross, Curator. Ms. Doris Stroud, Archivist. Ms. Gabrielle Glenn, Historian. Ms. Chandra Patterson, AKA Connections Coordinator. And Dr. Keisha Pugh Buchanan serves as Standards Chairman. We would also like to recognize and honor all the outstanding leadership from our Target and Initiative Chairman. For 2022, Target 1 and the HBCU Committee. Ms. Carla Wiley Esquire, Chairman. Ms. Cassandra Nelson Sappington and Dr. Kathy Kennedy Harris serves as co-chairman for #CAP. Ms. Jasa Collins serves as EAF Captain. And Araya Faith Jackson also served as a co-chairman for supporting the HBCU Committee. Target 2, Initiative 2. Ms. Tawana Everhart, Chairman. Ms. Lisa Norris, Ms. Tanya Brown, Ms. Tricia Lakes, Mrs. Felicia Ford, all 4 serving as co-chairman for this target and initiative. Target 3, Initiative 3. Mrs. Brandis Thompson serves as chairman. Ms. Maya Davis, Mrs. Etna Baldwin, and Mrs. Carrie King all serve as co-chairman for this target and initiative. Target 4, Ms. Sheldia Fairley serves as chairman. Mrs. Colette Pratt, Ms. Allison Benton, and Mrs. Jaleesa White-Smith all serve as co-chairman for this initiative and or target, this target. Thank you for your exemplary leadership. And now I'll turn it over to Ms. Bridgette Grant to talk about the rest of our targets and or initiative leadership.
Target 5, Initiative 6. Mr. Reyes-Williams is the chairman. Mrs. Ashley Mears, Mrs. Judy Benjamin, Mrs. Claudia Cotton, Dr. Dorian Brown Crosby served as co-chairman. Scholarships, Mrs. Monica Dukes Jackson. Meditation Corps, Mrs. Yvette Hall, Mrs. Sherry Ware. Nominating, Mrs. Candace Carty. Awards, recognition, and scrapbooking, Ms. Veronica Anthony Norris and Ms. Betty Johnson. Sisterly Relations, Chairman, Mrs. Charlotte Atkins, Co-Chairman, Mrs. Brenda Juncan, Mrs. Monica Grandison, and Mrs. Stephanie Bailey. Membership, Chairman, Mrs. Janice Drake, Co-Chairman, Dr. Sarah Williams, and Mrs. Ursula Phoenix Ware. Tellers, Mrs. Cheryl Freeman, Chairman. MLK Day of Service, Ms. Willeen White-Smith, Ms. Yvette Hall, Ms. Dolores Cross. Risk Management, Chairman, Ms. Keena Hudson, Co-Chairman, Mrs. Verna Woods. NPHC Representative, Mrs. Cassandra Kirk. Protocol Chairman, Dr. Chandra Abbott. Co-Chairman, Mrs. Annette Hall and Mrs. Shirlene Rogers. Mary Shy Scott Memorial Park. Chairman for this committee was Mrs. Deborah Lewis. Co-chairman are Mrs. Chantel DeWitt and Ms. Allison Benton. Signature Executive Leadership Programs, Mrs. Jan Hilliard. Technology, Chairman, Mrs. Vicki Adams, co-chaired by Mrs. Tiffany Cameron and Ms. Cherie Bacon. Kappa Omega Reading Programs, Ms. Bridgette Grant. Spiritual Oversight, Reverend Dr. Tanya L. Miles. Standards, Chairman, Dr. Keisha Pugh Buchanan. Co-chair, Mrs. Ethel Foster. Kappa Omega President's Council, Dr. Ann Watts. 2019 Marie Woolfolk Taylor Marker, Dr. Icy Johnson. Kappa Omega Literary Club, Mrs. Willeen White Smith and Mrs. Jaleesa White Smith. Connections and Social Action, Ms. Sandra Patterson and Ms. Chantel Mullen. Programs, Ms. Bridgette Grant. Bylaws, Dr. Linda Thompson. Publicity and Public Relations, Mrs. Sabrina Robinson. Hostess, Courtesy Committee, Ms. Kismet Sims. Communications, Ms. Harriet Fairley. Graduate Advisors Council, Chairman, Mrs. Jolene Butts Freeman. Co-chairman, Ms. Harriet Fairley.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Ms. Morgan Easley, a spring 2021 initiate of the Kappa Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and I also have the distinct honor of serving as a mistress of ceremony today. Implementation of Alpha Kappa Alpha's international programs and the internal management of the sorority policies and protocols is spearheaded by International Committee Chairman. Service on international committees is among the highest of honors that any Alpha Kappa Alpha member can achieve. For those who don't know, Kappa Omega has a rich history of members being selected for prestigious leadership roles on the cluster, regional, and international levels, including former international committee members and chairmen, and even former international presidents. Please join me in recognizing our Kappa Omega members who currently serve in international leadership positions. Dr. LeKeisha Payton Stewart, International Leadership Development Committee Chair. Mrs. Bridgette Owens Ashford, International Leadership Development Committee South Atlantic Representative. Ms. Franca H. Young, International Communications Committee South Atlantic Representative. And Ms. Allison Benton, International Spiritual Committee, South Atlantic Representative. Moving on to recognition of our regional committee appointments. We have Ms. Franca Young, Conference Planning Committee Chairman. Ms. Lynn Y. Jones, Conference Planning Committee Member. Mrs. Harriet Adams Fairley, Leadership Committee Member. Ms. Kathy Owens Camp, Membership Committee Member. Ms. Kathy Gary Adams, Music Committee Member. Mrs. Brendalyn M. Duncan, Phylacter Committee Member. Mrs. Bridgette D. Owens Ashford, Undergraduate Services Committee Member. And Ms. Tracy Slade, Hospitality Committee Member. Mrs. Marjorie Young, Region Historian. Moving on to recognition of our delegates. Our Kappa Omega delegates have represented the chapter during the last year in person. With Kappa Omega's size, having such a large chapter, we have the maximum number of delegates a chapter can have as prescribed by Alpha Kappa Alpha's Manual of Standard Procedure. Members who are delegates by virtue of their office include our chapter president, vice president, and graduate advisor. The remaining delegates are elected to serve. Today, we recognize our chapter delegates for their outstanding service and for always representing Kappa Omega well. For our 2022 Boulé delegates, we have Dr. LeKeisha D. Jackson, President, Ms. Bridgette Grant, Vice President, Mrs. Jolene Butts Freeman, Graduate Advisor, Ms. Algernon Barlow, Ms. Tanya Benefield, Co-Lead, Ms. Cheryl Blandon, Ms. Renee Burks, Ms. Kathy Kemp, Ms. Jasmine Freeman, Ms. Yvette Norman Hall, Ms. Aisha Scott, Co-Lead, and Ms. Hattie Thomas. Moving on to our South Atlantic Regional Conference delegates. Dr. LeKeisha D. Jackson, President, Ms. Bridgette Grant, Vice President, Mrs. Jolene Butts Freeman, Graduate Advisor, Ms. Kathy Gary Adams, Ms. Chantel DeWitt, Mrs. Felisa Ford, Lead, Reverend Dr. Tanya Miles, Ms. Angela Murphy, Ms. Harvinia Parker, Ms. Colette Pratt, Ms. Charlene Rogers, Ms. Cassandra Nelson Sappington. We will now hear from Nina with the honorees for outstanding international program service.
Kappa Omega members of Distinction Awards 2022 International Programs. Target 5 Global Impact. Alpha Kappa Alpha engages in programming designed to enhance the international footprint of the sorority. The work of this target centers around National Global Impact Day, Global Assistant Activities, Souls for Souls, Lions Club International Eyeglass Initiative, Pillowcase Project benefiting children in Haiti, Refugees in America Assistance Program, RAAP. The leadership of Target 5 would like to recognize Ms. Claudia Cotton for her outstanding service and Ms. Cheryl Blandon, who was crowned the 2022 Queen of Soul for donating the most shoes to our Souls for Souls collection. Empower Our Family Initiative. Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority has a strong history of supporting and servicing families, for we understand a healthy family is the foundation of a healthy community. We will take a multi-generational approach to fortify families within our communities by addressing child hunger and promoting positive youth development and leadership, mental well-being, and senior life. The chairman of this initiative would like to recognize Ms. Tanya Benefield for her dedication to this initiative. Economic Wealth Initiative. Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority is launching our most progressive and revolutionary economic initiatives this century. The administration has created institutional level solutions to combat institutional level challenges. We will further encourage and equip our members to place key strategies into action to build personal, organizational, and community economic wealth. The chairman of this initiative would like to recognize Ms. Carrie King for her dedication to this initiative. Enhance Our Environment Initiative. Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority has the power to galvanize our organization of more than 120,000 active members, create a ripple effect, and make a significant impact on our environment. We will employ select strategies to optimize our collective ability and to improve and protect the environment at scale. We will prioritize activities that promote the adoption of more sustainable and responsible practices. The chairman of this initiative would like to recognize Ms. Nicola Robinson for her dedication to this initiative. Social Justice Initiative. Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority has always been at the forefront of social justice to promote fairness and equity. We stand in the gap to empower our communities and act in the best interest of all people through social advocacy and justice. We will equip communities with the tools, knowledge, and support to activate their voices and mobilize self-help to empower communities to help themselves. The chairman of this initiative would like to recognize Ms. Chandra Patterson for her dedication to this initiative. Your contributions are changing lives and making a difference.
In our next segment, we'd like to recognize those in our community helping us to amplify our efforts, expand our reach, and effectuate our goal of providing service to all mankind. First, we would like to recognize the UPS store number 7409. And secondly, Ms. Lawana Ezard from Harper Archer Elementary School. To our 2022 community partners and community supporters, we thank you for allowing us the privilege of serving alongside you to help better our community. Thank you so much for your continued support. Next, we will have the President's Special Awards.
The President's Special Awards are to a special group of people who continue to impact the Atlanta community through service and through contributions. The first Community Award or President's Award goes to Morris Brown College. The second award goes to Triple Threat Foundation, Kawima Mosley as the president. The next President Award goes to Family Unification Network, Joanne Cash as the president. The Mint Gallery, Julissa White Smith, Executive Director. Women Watch Africa, Inc. And we would also like to pay special tribute and highlight the Kappa Omega Literary Club, Willeen White Smith serving as chairman and Julissa White Smith co-chairman. My Sister's Keeper initiative is also being recognized for their outstanding efforts in keeping the spirit of sisterhood alive, with Kismet Sims, chairman. Another honoree, the YMCA of Greater Atlanta. And Harper Archer Elementary School, Ms. Lawana Ezard, the Director of Partnerships and Programs. The Greenhouse Foundation, and Georgia Stand Up, Deborah Scott, Chief Executive Director. The Essential Foundation, Deidre Brown Collins, Chief Operating Officer in Outreach. An additional honoree is the Pink Table Talk series, falling under Target 1 for HBCU for Life. I'd like to recognize Target 1 leadership, Carla Wiley, Kathy Kennedy Harris, and Cassandra Nelson Sappington. That concludes the President's Awards and Special Honorees. Congratulations to the community organizations and individuals for their outstanding efforts and contributions, not only to Kappa Omega chapter, but to the Atlanta community at large. Congratulations.
Congratulations again to all of the recipients of the President's Awards. Your partnership in serving to build better communities is commendable. Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated has a long history of providing service to all mankind, a tradition that continues through the commitment and dedication of its members. Each year, the members of Kappa Omega select a sister who exemplifies leadership, service, and sisterhood. Congratulations to Mrs. Jolene Butts Freeman, who was recognized as Kappa Omega's Sister of the Year for 2022. Your gift of sisterliness and service is immeasurable. In Kappa Omega's journey to 100 years, we have members who have reached a few milestones along the way. Please join us as we recognize, honor, and celebrate our beloved sisters who in 2022 have dedicated at least 65 years to sisterhood service. Pearls are always appropriate. Miss Pearl Green Ewell, Gamma Gamma, 1957. Miss Betty King Johnson, Beta Pi, 1957. Miss Dorothy M. Kendall, Kappa Omega, 1957. Ms. Doris Thomas Stroud, Alpha Pi, 1957. Ms. Dorothy Thomas Swain, Alpha Pi, 1957. At this time, we would like to recognize and honor our sisters who in 2022 have dedicated at least 50 years to sisterhood, service, and living their life like it's golden. Miss Shirley Barlow, Gamma Gamma, 1972. Ms. Alfredine Scott Benton, Kappa Omega, 1972. Ms. Cheryl Dumas, Gamma Gamma, 1972. Ms. Cheryl Phillips Taylor, Blay, 1972. Reaching their first milestone, we would like to recognize and honor our beloved sisters who have dedicated at least 25 years to sisterhood and service. Set your sights upon our 2022 Silver Stars. Dr. Keisha Pugh Buchanan, Gamma Gamma, 1997. Miss Monica Grandison, Epsilon Iota, 1997. Miss Monica Dukes Jackson, Gamma Gamma, 1997. Miss Keenan M. McClendon, Delta, 1997. Miss LaShonda Misher, Boulay, 1997. Miss Nicole M. Bullen, Gamma Iota, 1997. Miss Tamika M. Sperling Brooks, Sigma Delta Omega, 1997. We have our life members from 2022. Chandra Coleman Abbott, Juliet Amy, Beverly Anderson, Billette Owens Ashford, Charlotte Moore Atkins, Mae Austin, Leslie Mae Banks, Richard Dean Moore Barker, Algernon Nicole Barlow, Shirley McCoo Barlow, Betty C. Barnett, Alfredine Scott Benton, Brenda Joyce Blake, Marie Housley Blake, Laura Denise Bland, Colette M. Bowles, Sherry D. Bonner, Mary Boone, Jeannie Bowen, Thelma R. Bowen, Jocelyn Burnell Brock, Dorian Brown Cosby, Dorothy C. Brown, Melisha R. Brown, Marie Bradbury Brown, Natalie B. Bryant, Carrie White Buggs, Kathy A. Owens Camp, Anita Rebecca White Carson, Candace Fitzhugh Carty, Ann D. Cleveland, Brenda S. Hill Cole, Maddie Jones Coleman. Ms. Verna Elizabeth Colson, Melva Wilson Costeen, Paul Cotton, Dolores Harris Cross, Rebecca Mitchell, Jerona Davis, Henry Davis, Misha Davis, Radia Dinkins, Janice Drake, Cheryl Dumas, Wanda Ellis, Faye Evans, Vivian Fitzhugh, Ethel Foster, Kimberly Franklin, Cheryl Freeman, Kathy Adams, Cheryl George, Gabriel Glenn, Kimberly Gordon, Bessie Green, Lanice Griffin, Murtis Griffin, Gloria Gross, Rosa Hadley, Annette Hall, Betty Hall, Vet Hall, Dolores Hampton, Rosalind Hargrove, Bobby Moore, Annie Hinton, Jan Hilliard, Wandrea Hines, Monica Jackson, Norma Jenkins, Mary Jimerson, Betty Johnson, Ernestine Johnson, Glenda Johnson, Icy Johnson, Charlene Johnson, Jimmy Jolly, Anna Jones, Faye Jones, Lena Jones, Lynn Jones, Vanette Jordan, Vernella Joseph, Gwendolyn Kelly, Dorothy Kendall, Margaret Kirk, Elvira Kennard, LaWanda Long, Rosalind Lumpkin, Ethel Mallory, Annie Marks, Keena McClendon, Nancy McCreary, Deborah Mitchell, Brenda Moore, Lisa Moy, Cassandra Nelson Sappington, Lisa Norris, Veronica Anthony Norris, Janine Oliga, Lisa Parson, Sandra Patterson, Lucretia Peyton Stewart, Mrs. Monica Kaufman Pearson, Gloria Perry, Frances Pinkston, Jean Price, Geraldine Pritchard, Eleanor Proctor, Angelique Proctor Anderson, Roberta Rhodes, Janice Richardson, Betty Robinson, Charlene Rogers, Rosalind Rubin, Gloria Scott, Pamela Scott, Caroline Simmons, Deborah Sims, Willie Cobb Slay, Cynthia Sloan, Ann Small, Lucy Stevens, Miriam Stokes, Doris Thomas Stroud, Dorothy Swan, Eloise Sykes, Cheryl Taylor, Hazel Taylor, Gloria Thomas, Hattie Mae Thomas, Linda Gale Thompson, Melinda Thrasher, Maudette Twyman, Mae McQueen, Dermony Walker, Tamara Walker, Alice Ware, Mary Agnes Ware, Sherry Ware, Anita Warren, Sherilyn Woods Washington, Annie Watts, Maddie Welch, Elizabeth White, Walleen White Smith, Carla Wiley, Sarah Williams, Shirley Willingham, Sharon Willis, Vernita Wynn, Barbara Woolfolk, Franca H. Young, and Marjorie Harris Young. In 2022, we had some reclaimed pearls who reactivated, and they are Shayla Jones, Nicole Bullen, Brittany Burnett, Angela Christian, Sharifa Crawford, Portia Dillard, Ansley Dobbs, Uriel Dudley, Torvia Foster, Tia Harrington, Ramila Hill, Tara Kitchens, Isadora Lanier, Tangelia Parker, Tamia Brooks, Alexis Watts, Esther Williams, and Tina Woodward. We also had transfers in this wonderful year of 2022. Miss Lauren Bailey, Miranda Baylor, Jocelyn Lateo, Karis Clark, Carrington Duncan, Wanchella Francis, Chanel Cox, Lori Jackson, Raquel Jones, Jocelyn Lateo, Jolita Lynch, Daniel Pollard, Naya Rivers, Erica Simpson, Joyce Stewart, Kelly Stewart, Athena Walker, Quincy Williams, and Jamela Wynn. Now we'll hear from Morgan for sorority achievement.
Alpha Kappa Alpha's South Atlantic region is the largest of Alpha Kappa Alpha's 10 regions, covering Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina. The South Atlantic Regional Conference Awards aims to highlight exceptional chapters and individual members from the region for their service and accomplishments. The 2022 South Atlantic Regional Conference Award for Kappa Omega chapter include a first place tie for Target 1 #CAP in the category of the extra large chapter. Second place for Target 1 HBCU for Life, a call to action in the category of extra large chapter. First place for Target 3 Building Your Economic Legacy in the category of extra large chapter. And first place for the Carolyn G. Randolph, AKA Connection Award in the category of Extra Large Chapter. Now we will move on to Cluster 5 awards. Being the premier chapter, Kappa Omega continues to exemplify excellence through sustainable service. Cluster 5 is the largest of several clusters in the South Atlantic region and includes Metro Atlanta, North Georgia, and Middle Georgia. This year, one of our own was recognized for being an outstanding educator. The Constance Hill Outstanding Educator Award. This award is presented to a graduate member who works as an educator. The member educator's character, achievements, and leadership consistently exceed the norm. Her infectious passion for education inspires students and her peers to excel. This award is to bring focus and attention to the enormous sacrifice and impact educators have on children, and hence the award. Congratulations, Mrs. Felisa Ford. Next, you will hear closing remarks from our chapter president, Dr. LeKeisha D. Jackson.
Thank you for joining us for this 2022 awards program. I'd like to send sincere thanks to the Awards and Recognition and Scrapbooking Committee and the committee members. Ms. Veronica Anthony Norris, co-chairman, Ms. BJohnson, co-chairman, Ms. Bridgette Grant, vice president, in all her efforts for the programs, Ms. Faye Bryant, Ms. Morgan Easley, Ms. Felisa Ford, Ms. India Jackson, Ms. Felicia Johnson, Ms. Marlita Jones, Mrs. Latoya Macbeth, Dr. Thea Murphy, Ms. Shanice Webster Jones, and Dr. Nina Reyes-Williams. Thank you so much for your outstanding efforts in putting all of these things together, as well as our awards, recognitions, and scrapbooking. Your efforts are truly appreciated, and we thank you. Again, the committee would also like to thank the following people for their support, which also includes the Kappa Omega Technology Committee.